Hey there, subscribe to my channel, and also press this bell icon so you never miss any new updates, cause whenever we upload new video you will get a notification on your phone.
Part 1.
You will hear part of an introductory talk on nutrition.
First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 4.
Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 4.
Good afternoon. Many people in the Western world eat the wrong food, and they eat far too much of it. So, the topic of my lecture today is healthy eating. I'll divide my talk into 3 parts. Firstly, I'm going to define what I mean by healthy eating. After that, I'll go on to talk about why people don't eat properly, and then I'll finish my lecture with some ideas for improving the situation. Right. So, what do I mean by healthy eating? Well, some people might think it means eating a lot of meat. Of course, vegetarians wouldn't agree with this. They think eating meat is very unhealthy. Other people think that eating a lot of cabbage is good for you, or a lot of salad. Well, naturally, cabbage, salad and meat can all be part of healthy eating. But for me, healthy eating means 2 things. One is eating a balanced diet, and the other is eating the right amount of food. In my opinion, a balanced diet means eating a variety of foods, including meat, vegetables, fruit, cereals, and dairy foods. Obviously, the amount of food we should eat is more difficult to decide. It depends a lot on how active we are.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 5 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 5 to 10.
Now on to my next point. Why do so many people eat badly? Well, let's look first at having a balanced diet. To have a balanced diet, you have to plan your meals in advance and then buy the right food, and then take time to cook it properly. But these days people are so busy working that they don't have time to go shopping, so they end up buying fast food at the last minute. Another reason people don't eat well nowadays is that it's actually cheaper to buy food already prepared in a packet. So people who haven't got much money will buy packet food rather than cook something fresh. And a final reason why people don't eat healthily is that they don't know how to. In my opinion, schools don't do nearly enough to educate their pupils in healthy eating habits.
Now listen and answer questions 8 to 10.
And now to my 3rd and last point. What can we do to solve the problem? Well, I think it can be solved by 3 main groups: families, schools, and the government. To start with, parents should make sure their children have a healthy diet. Secondly, a lot of schools have self-service machines where their pupils can buy soft drinks, crisps, sweets and chocolates. I think schools should change what they sell in these machines. Another thing schools can do is make sure that the food they serve in their canteens is fresh and well balanced. And to finish, I'll briefly mention two of the measures I think the government should take to encourage healthy eating. One is to limit advertising unhealthy food, and the other is to spend more money on educating the public about the benefits of a healthy diet. In my next lecture, I'll go into more detail about them.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2.
You will hear a talk about young people living on their own. Listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 12. Listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 12.
Loneliness is something we all suffer from in varying degrees, but young people living on their own can be particularly vulnerable. Many who leave the family home find they are less confident and have more difficulty in finding their feet than they expected. Often, going to work or study in another town or city will be the first time they have lived away from home. Although this may sound like an adventure for those dying to get away from the glare of the parental eye, for others it is a daunting prospect which generates apprehension, uncertainty and even fear. In fact, in a recent survey of over 1,600 people who had recently left home, 32% said that understanding and coping with loneliness was a crucial issue for them and made them feel highly stressed and distracted. An annual report by researchers last year recorded a noticeable increase in the number of individuals with homesickness, transition and isolation issues. Acknowledging that feelings of loneliness and isolation could impede progress at work or study, they examined the number of people using the welfare and health services. They found that young people in particular were prone to difficulties. Last year, 61% of all people using counselling services were aged under 30, and of this group, 57% were men.
Now listen and answer questions 13 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 13 to 20.
Leaving home involves a major change in lifestyle, work patterns and degree of independence. You will be away from home, family and friends and are no longer supported by familiar surroundings. For this reason, in the first year a lot of young people suffer from loneliness. Ironically, this sense of isolation comes at a time when you are likely to be surrounded by people most of the time. Living in a busy city, travelling on crowded buses and trains, you will be constantly among people. But this can sometimes compound your sense of being alone. Seeing others who appear at ease among large crowds, mingling and making friends, can make you feel excluded and inadequate. Adapting to a new environment makes people uncertain of what to do or how to behave and breeds insecurities which can make for a real sense of isolation. It is often those who are more used to being on their own who deal best with the transitional period of leaving home. Other reasons for feeling alone include high expectations of the big city, where you have the best time of your life and meet lifelong friends. It may be the first time you have had to make new friends since you started primary school, and perhaps you are reluctant or finding it hard to replace old friends whom you miss. There are also pressures to juggle work and socialising, which may leave you feeling left out. Or it could be that you have a long-distance relationship and feel torn between your new lifestyle and that special person who lives so far away. Because loneliness can leave you with a sense of low self-esteem, where you become self-conscious and feel you have been rejected, it is very difficult to overcome. You may be reluctant to even try and make new friends or take part in social activities, and will also find it difficult to say no to things, leaving you feeling exploited and weak. One of the ways of combating loneliness is to remember that it's not your fault, and that it's something everyone has to deal with, despite appearances. Counsellors advise those feeling lonely to speak to someone they know about their feelings. They also ask them to consider joining groups and societies, and to get involved in activities which interest them as a way of meeting more people. Of course, overdoing it and jamming your schedule with too many things just to avoid being alone will not work. But meeting others with common interests may be a step forward. If you still feel like you need someone to talk to, you could try group counselling, where you will be able to talk to and receive support from a small number of people with the same difficulties as you. For more information or to be put in touch with an individual counsellor, contact the local town hall support services.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear a tutor and 2 students discussing the best ways to study.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Well, how are you both settling in?
Fine.
Yes, no problems. So far, anyway.
Good. Remember that as your personal tutor, I'm here to help you if you do have any difficulties. Now, as you know, lectures start on Monday, so I thought we'd look at a few ways of making the most of them, especially in terms of the notes you take. Let's begin by thinking about what you can do before you even go to the lecture. Any ideas?
Make sure you're up to date with all the background reading, so you know plenty about the subject already.
Yes, that's essential. The lecturer will assume you have that knowledge. Anything else, Carlos?
Well, check what the topic's going to be. Of the lecture, that is.
I'd go a bit further than that and consider what the content may be. Then you could ask yourself some questions that you want answering and listen out for the relevant information during the lecture.
Okay.
Now that brings us to the lecture itself and the actual business of writing notes. But there's a lot to deal with there, so we'll come back to that later. What I'd like to do for the moment is continue with the process of note-taking and move on to the next stage. Any suggestions for what that might be?
When the lecture is over, you mean?
Yes, once you're able to sit down somewhere quiet with your notes.
Read them?
More than that, You need to make sure they'll still make sense to you weeks, months later.
Edit them?
Yes, that's what's needed. It's well worth spending a few minutes on it. Any missing words, anything difficult to read, things you didn't have time to jot down, now is the time to do so, while everything's still fresh in your mind.
Right. And after that, when's the best time to revise them?
When do you think, Carlos?
I'd say just before the next lecture, in the same subject.
Precisely. That's a vital time to look at them again, for obvious reasons. But it's definitely not the only time. When should you revise them again?
A month later, maybe?
Sooner, and much more often than that. I'd recommend you look at them again once a week. That's why it's so important they're complete and easy to follow.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Right. Let's go back to note-taking and begin with the basics before the lecture has even started. What should you do when you walk into the room?
Get a good seat, at the front if you can, where you can hear clearly and avoid distractions.
Yes, though obviously others will have had the same idea, so it's as well to get there a bit early. So, when the lecture's underway and you're busy jotting things down, what should you try to ensure?
That you're getting all the main points.
And what if you don't catch something you know must be important?
I'd leave a space. Then I could check it later, perhaps by asking a question at the end and fill it in afterwards.
That's an excellent way to deal with it, yes. And there's something else I'd like to mention here. Talking about going through notes afterwards, it's absolutely vital that what you write is legible for one very good reason. It saves time. You'll waste many hours during the course if your revision is held up because you can't read what you've written. Okay, what else can we do to make listening and note-taking more efficient?
Well, I always listen out for signpost words.
Sorry, what are they?
They're the ones lecturers use to say where they're going. A bit like a signpost at a road junction, I suppose. Things like, the first reason is, however, to sum up, and so on.
Yes, they can tell you when something important is coming, and help you organize your notes, too. Is there anything else you can add, Carlos?
There's something I think's very useful, but it's later, after the lecture is finished.
That's fine. Go on.
Well, what I do is go through what I've written down, summing up the main points in a few words in the margin, on the left-hand side of the page. I try to use words that'll jog my memory, so that I can remember what everything's about when I look at them again.
Yes, that can work very well. What some people do to review their notes is cover up their full notes from the lecture, maybe with a piece of paper or a card, and concentrate just on what they've put in the margin, trying to recall the details. Then they move the cover down a little and check whether they were right.
Or you could put your main points on another piece of paper and clip them together. Instead of covering and uncovering, you just hold a page in each hand.
Sure. It's down to personal preference, really. Everyone has their own learning style.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 4.
Part 4. Listen to the following lecture about lightning.
First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
In earliest times, man considered lightning to be one of the great mysteries of nature. Some ancient people believed that lightning and thunder were the weapons of God. In reality, lightning is a flow of electricity formed high above the earth. A single flash of lightning 1.6 kilometers long has enough electricity to light 1 million light bulbs. The American scientist and statesman Benjamin Franklin was the first to show the connection between electricity and lightning in 1752. In the same year, he also built the first lightning rod. This device protects buildings from damage by lightning. Modern science has discovered that one stroke of lightning contains more than 15 million volts. A spark between a cloud and the earth may be as long as 13 kilometers and travels at a speed of 30 million meters per second. Scientists estimate that there are about 2,000 million flashes of lightning per year. Lightning hits the Empire State Building in New York City 30 to 48 times a year. In the United States alone, it kills an average of 1 person every day. The safest place to be in case of an electrical storm is in a closed car. Outside, one should go to low ground and not under trees. Also, one should stay out of water and away from metal fences. Inside a house, people should avoid opening doorways and windows and not touch wires or metal things. With lightning, it is better to be safe than sorry.
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.